The traditional pattern in life for most of us is to hit the ground running when the alarm sounds in the morning, go full speed ahead all day with the possibility of a short break over the lunch hour, cap it off with a session at the gym, kid activities or errands before, if we're lucky, crashing on the couch for a bit of mindless TV before crawling into bed and then starting the whole process over the next day. What if there was a better approach available? A way to recharge our lives through a natural restoration process that wasn't based on some hokey-pokey song and dance, but rather established, evidence-based practices. Welcome to the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper, co-founder of the Catalyst Coaching Institute. Today's guest is cognitive neuroscientist Dr. Sara Mednick, author of the exciting new book, The Power of Downstate, which takes the reader through the research-based strategies to tap into the opportunities provided by purposeful downstate extension and enhancement to make the most of our personal and professional lives. Who doesn't want that? Speaking of downstate, the event of the year for health and wellness coaches to get recharged and re-energized, the NBHWC-approved Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium is filling fast, and we will be capping registration very soon. If you're an independent coach looking for a getaway, or you work with a team of coaches seeking a team-building event that will leave everyone refreshed, this is it. All the details are available under the retreat tab at catalystcoachinginstitute.com or email us with any questions, results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And if you're not yet a coach but are looking to get certified, you can check out the details about the next certification training on the website as well. Now it's time to learn how enhancing the way in which we utilize our downstate can turbocharge our lives with Dr. Sara Mednick on the latest episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. This topic is so important. I'm talking about downstate, and I saw your quote about you'll only be as good in your upstate as you are in your downstate. Wow, what a huge intro to get people engaged in what we're talking about today. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate being able to come and talk to you.
Let's set the stage a little bit here. A couple of definitions. So your new book is The Power of Downstate. Let us kind of fill us in on what's an upstate, what's a downstate, how do we benefit from tuning into the way each one is utilized throughout the day? Just kind of lay out the groundwork for us here.
Yeah. So the downstate is all of our restorative processes that we need to plug into on a daily basis to recharge.
Okay.
And that can go on during the daytime, that can go on at night. But the idea is that we're actually rhythmic, and the rhythm means that we have optimal times for activity and for being, and for dealing with stress and for output. And that's the time of the upstate, where we naturally have all the energy we need to go out and be, do, and create. And then what follows the rhythm is the downstate, right? Is that, and that downstate we don't really prioritize enough in life. And we fill our lives with so much upstate stuff, and then we give so little priority to our restorative processes. But the downstate is just as important as the upstate, because that's where we replenish all of the resources that we've lost, or that we used up in the upstate, and it gets us ready for the next upstate.
Right.
So that's where the idea comes from, is really looking at life. And, as a scientist, I've seen that we are rhythmic, and that this principle of rhythms is what we've somehow forgotten.
So I'm sure there are patterns around circadian rhythms, that kind of thing, but is your downstate routine going to be different than mine? What
that's a great
patterns
question.
are there that we see?
So there are universal influences that make all of our downstates and ups, that some of our upstates and downstates are universal, like the sun. The sun gives us the day and the night. And that's a really strong signal that nobody can really deny, right? That the whole world wakes up in the morning and the petals open and all of the animals, the ones that are awake in the day. Mm-hmm. They come out and they do all the things, veni, vidi, vici, and then they go back into their burrow after having a whole long day, and then they go into their downstate when the sun goes down. And that's a very strong principle that is true for all of us. But there's a lot of internal rhythms that we have in our own bodies, and those are completely dependent on you and what you do. So the idea is, that your heart has a rhythm, your respiration, your breathing has a rhythm, your metabolism has a rhythm, your guts have a rhythm, your whole brain has a rhythm where it's at its peak during, certain times, and then during other times it's actually flagging and it needs to rest. So the idea is, yes, there's universal rhythms, but there's a lot of personal rhythms that you can, by changing your behavior and really thinking about these rhythms, you can get these upstates into alignment with each other. So your breath can be aligned with your heart, and your eating can be aligned with your metabolism. Your exercise can be aligned with your stress response. And all these things make you more powerful, because the more you can kind of stack your upstates all together and create sort of an alignment with all of them, the more your whole body will resonate.
So where do I start? I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one nodding my head going, okay, this is awesome. What's the starting point? What is the first tip of, okay, we have a lot of healthy, well-being focused folks listening to this. So let's assume some of the baseline stuff is there. They're getting their 7 to 8 hours of sleep. They're eating relatively healthy. They're getting some exercise and activity throughout the day. If those are in place, what would be the next couple of things that somebody should look into?
Yeah. So the one of the key elements of really tapping into the downstate on a regular basis during the day is regulating your breath. Our breath is basically a balancing act between our stress response, what I call REV, the sympathetic nervous system that revs you up, and then the parasympathetic system, what I call restore, that restores you back down to calm. And when you inhale, you get this excitatory, revved up state. And when you exhale, you actually create this calm. And that idea of these two different states that need to balance each other, this revved up state with this restore state, that scales to a whole bunch of different levels where you can basically have, where you need to have a balance between your stressed out state, your revved up state, and your restore state. So at the root of it is the breath. When you are anxious and allowing the world to really come at you and stress you out and kind of hijack your sense of well-being, the first thing that you usually do is you stop breathing. And we start, like we open up the email, there's something called email apnea. We stop breathing, yes. Right? That it's a stress response of the world coming at you, and you stop. So one of the key ways of really rooting yourself in this downstate, in this restore response, is by controlling your breath. So there's an idea of taking, it's not an idea, but there's a principle of taking slow, deep breathing, but really in a specific way where you breathe about 6 breaths a minute. That's basically 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale. And just engaging in that type of breathing means that your restore response is basically taking over and saying, I'm not going to get freaked out. I've got control over this situation. I can manage, and I've got this. And it just means that you can, at any time of day, start going into your slow, deep breathing and calming yourself down. So that's one really key element that I think that we think about all these things that we can do. And then it actually is, well, what are you doing right now? You're sitting in traffic, you're in this meeting, you're freaking out. Let's just try deep breathing right now and see how that actually just starts the whole process. So that's a really key element.
So let's pause on that one for a second. Does that conscious choice, has there been any research on if I'm doing that 4, 5, 6 times a day, that it carries over into my breathing pattern when I'm not conscious about it? Or have we not studied that yet?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So there's a study that looked at giving people slow, deep breathing as a training, and then they give them stress responses. They give them stress experiences. And what they find is that the people who've been doing the training tap in to that training that they've had and start engaging slow, deep breathing to remain calm. So definitely there's a carryover effect. Well, whatever you're doing, it's kind of like yoga. What you're doing on the mat kind of gets carried off the mat. That principle is actually true with breathing as well. And you can really amplify it. There's all sorts of new apps that you can use that will get you into HRV biofeedback. And that HRV biofeedback is really what it's doing is giving you real direction to make sure that you're getting into the right zone of breathing to really amplify that restore response. And there's some beautiful research showing that not only is that like 5 weeks of this training increasing cognition, but it also is showing increased white matter in the frontal lobe, which is where we have our executive function, working memory, attention, selective attention, inhibitory response to sort of ignore distractors. So there's a lot of bidirectional communication between your brain and your body. And the breath is really one of the places that starts.
Any favorite apps you want to toss out there that might be helpful to somebody that doesn't have a special Oura ring or certain watch or those kinds of things that they could use for that HRV feedback?
Yeah, the one that I use in my lab, because it's really science-based and they're real evidence-based thinkers, are HeartMath. And HeartMath is, I think, been around a long time, and they have a nonprofit side that just does science. And I think that they really have a lot of integrity.
Excellent. So HeartMath, like numbers. Okay, very good.
Yeah.
We had James Nestor, who wrote the book Breathe. I'm sure you're familiar with his work. One of the most popular guests we've had. So we really took a deep dive into the breathing stuff. What about for the person that, and I've looked at your background. You have done so much with your life. So I'm asking this of you as well as many of the listeners who are the type AAA, always trying to get stuff done. There's another thing that needs to be done. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to hammer through the day. Obviously, you're a good example, someone who has figured out how to make this part of your life. Any tips for the people out there that say, I don't have time. Sure, great idea. I love it. Thanks, Dr. Mednick, but I've got stuff to do.
Yeah.
You're getting stuff done and you're doing this. How do you help the person that says, I can't have downstate. I got to just go.
Right. It's like, yeah, I completely hear it. The book just came out, right? And so my life of where I'm all about my health boundaries and I'm all about, this is the time I exercise. This is when I stop eating. This is when I do this. It's all gone out the window for the past month, and it's really been hard.
Yes.
It's really hard for me. And I feel like my body's not my own, and I feel like my head isn't clear. And I really see what happens when you don't prioritize yourself before you prioritize all the things that are coming at you. And I've always been really. One of the reasons I wrote the book is, everyone writes the book that they need to read, right? So for me,
research.
Research. Yeah. So for me, really understanding that there's so many, the book is chock filled with so many different recommendations, but, thinking about so thinking about yourself as a whole 24-hour day, right? Not just as I want to improve my sleep. So what can I do right when sleep happens? Or I want to do exercise. So what can I do to exercise, right? Or when I'm eating, I want to eat this, right? It's actually not just the what, but it's also when everything happens, and everything is also related. So when you think about exercise, the timing, if you think about yourself as in a 24-hour animal, right? The timing of your exercise affects your sleep. The timing of when you're in your upstate metabolism in the middle of the day, that's the best time to eat. And if you push yourself outside of that window, then you're actually you're revving yourself up. Eating increases your sympathetic arousal. It heats up your body, and that basically just demolishes any kind of restore response that you would want to have happen in the evening. So for those people who are super, super busy, as long as you're keeping those thoughts in your head about about how these systems fit together, and you are getting exercise, but you're pushing your HIIT exercise or cardiovascular exercise to the morning. Because then in the evening, you'll get this really big restorative response that matches your first bunch of sleep, which is very restorative. That's great. For eating, try to eat within a window that allows for, when your insulin starts to decrease, which it does for everybody, towards the evening, stop eating, because your metabolism is much lower and a lot of the food gets left into the bloodstream. It doesn't get processed, right? And then it gets left in the bloodstream, gets turned into fat. So having health boundaries that you just say, I don't want to think about this too much, but I know that this is the when of what I should be doing, because it's going to affect my ability to get to sleep, my ability to feel good the next day. And the other thing I think, for these people that you're talking about, is we have little clocks. Every single cell in our body is made of a clock, and that clock is looking for some place to sort of to fixate on, as saying, okay, when should I be ready for what? And creating these as habits that you just, die hard. Yeah, that you always eat at this time and that you don't eat at other times, that you exercise at this time and you don't exercise at other times. That means that your body starts to prepare for it. It starts to understand, okay, so at 9 a.m., this is what we're doing. And at 8 a.m., this is what we're doing. And it creates this, it primes itself and it can get ready. So even if you don't want to spend too much time thinking about this stuff, just the more of a habit you can make your life, the better for your health. When you eat outside of those windows, your body's not ready for that food. And it's actually just, it's very hard for it to mount a metabolic response to food that it's not prepared to eat.
Interesting.
It's the same thing for, trying to have a deep conversation at 2 a.m. It's just not the right time.
So applying that to exercise, if you are shifting around your exercise time, so you work out at 7 one day, 2 p.m. the next day, 10 a.m. the next day, beyond just the routine that it automates it, if you always do it at 7 or always do it at 2 or whatever, you're saying the body actually, after setting that routine consistently, the body begins to prepare for that, regardless of which time you pick, and not simply because it's automated. There's a benefit to that consistency beyond the routine.
So think about a really good way to think about this is a very sad topic, actually, is drug overdose. That, what happens is that people, when they're taking drugs, they usually take it with the same people, the same time, same place. And they start to develop a tolerance because their body knows, oh, this drug is coming, get ready. I see Joe, I'm going to get this drug. And so your body starts to prepare for it. And then what happens is that one time where they, are in Seattle and they take a drug somewhere that they're not expecting it, their body has zero preparation and they've already built up a tolerance. So they take this high dose that they would normally be able to handle in the old context. But now at this new context, it stops their heart, right? Because you physiologically haven't prepared for it.
Interesting. Even though it's the same drug.
And it's the same drug, same dose that you could handle anywhere else. Wow. Well, not anywhere else, but in the place that you normally handle it. Right. That's the exact same thing as suddenly trying to have that 2 a.m. deep conversation, suddenly trying to exercise at a time where where your body hasn't prepared for that exercise, right? But we're looking for habits. I call it the golden habits of highly successful people, right? Is just creating this, this is why people who are very successful kind of wear uniforms. They don't want to think about what they have to wear, right? They have their daily constitutional. They eat the same food. Right. There is something very helpful about putting all of that stuff into a box where you say, this is what I'm going to do. And my body knows I'm going to do it and I'm going to stick with it. And then it also means that you do it, right? Because now it's a habit.
Right. And that goes beyond the cognitive energy expenditure. This is literally the physical benefits as well.
Yeah, and I think that's another really important thing to think about is how much cognitive energy it takes to do something new. And if you have something that works and you stick with it, it basically releases a lot of cognitive energy to do what you want, right? Which is to focus on the task at hand, to focus on what it is that's really important to you. So if you constantly think about, well, what should I wear today?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Okay. That's perfect. You've noted several times, you even touched on it today, but in your writing, you noted that one of the most important things we can do is spend some time outside first thing in the morning. Why is that such a thing? And why does it, and actually, does it matter what we're doing when we're outside, or is it just literally get outside? And does it matter if there's cloud cover or it's October versus May, or, it seems like there are so many variables within that recommendation. Do those variables matter? Or do you look at it and say, well, of course they matter, but the big thing is get out?
So there's a couple of things in why to get outside. The first one is that in the morning, we get natural signals from the sun that it's the beginning of the upstate. So the morning light is blue, is one of the majority of the wavelengths is blue light. And that blue light sends a signal to our brain. There are cells that are basically waiting for that blue light to occur. And it's sort of these rooster cells that say, oh, it's morning. Okay. And let's start all of our upstate processes. Let's start the upstate for our metabolism and our energy resources and all that kind of stuff.
And looking out a window doesn't do it.
No, looking out a window doesn't do it because there's a lot of filters on windows these days.
Okay.
And, we spend way too much time indoors.
Sure.
And in front of screens that are not giving us enough light. So really spending time outside is twofold. One is that it gets you that natural blue light. But if you are in a winter location where it is very cloudy, you're not necessarily going to get enough of that light. So it is recommended that you get yourself an all spectrum light and just spend, 15 minutes while you're doing your first emails, and just keep that light on while you're having your morning tea, and just to expose yourself. It's basically, I think of it as, an orchestra with a whole bunch of all your different processes, or all the different, the woodwinds and the piccolos and all the different, instruments. And then the blue light is the conductor that just gives the downbeat where the music starts.
Great analogy.
And it all gets kind of, the rhythm all starts all together, and it brings it all together. So that's one thing. The other thing is that because, we spend so much time indoors, we're not benefiting from our natural environment, right? And so there's a lot of research that shows that when you bring your exercise outside, you exercise longer. You take deeper breaths, and you get more benefit. There's a lot of phytochemicals that are in plants and trees that you inhale, and that can be helpful for your immune system. So there's a really good symbiosis between, all natural beings, and we are one of them. So being outside is beneficial for your health, but it also means that it's more enjoyable. People have better sleep when they exercise outside than when they just exercise at a gym. So there's many reasons why we want to, take our stresses to nature and take our pleasures to nature, and just also be in that state of awe of nature, the beauty. And, we spend so much time in kind of in more industrial environments that are hard to really feel awe in that natural way that just a tree can make you feel awe. And that's a really, it brightens everything when you can get into that state, of just suddenly realizing, oh, my problems are small. This is a really big, beautiful thing. And I can now kind of set my priorities up in a different way. So there's a lot of benefits to tapping back into nature.
And I love so much what you're saying. What about for the person who's hearing this and saying, yeah, that makes sense, but I live in a loft in downtown, you name it, Chicago, New York, whatever. And I, take the subway to blah, blah, blah. there's a park I can kind of sort of get to. Like, what's the best option for that person to try to start to implement some of this?
Yeah, I think the park is the way to go. There are most cities have really nice parks. Take your lunch out to that park. Just sit in grass, sit under a tree. Don't eat the lunch at the desk. Yeah. Take a break. Give yourself that downstate where you're actually, processing as much as you can of the stress that you've sucked up, right, and let it go into that nature environment. Go to the beach. I think in the weekend, if you can prioritize taking a trip outside of the city and going into nature, taking a train, taking a bus, whatever it is, to actually get out of a city pretty regularly. I think that, it feels like this monumentous thing. I've always lived in cities, and like, how do you get out of the city, right? But it's so helpful to just pull yourself out of that daily grind and then be in a place that has none of those triggers and cues for the daily grind, and just be out in nature. And so I do think, like, making a concerted effort to get out of a city, whether it's, if you're lucky enough to have a car, but there's a lot of public transportation you can use just to get out.
Right. Okay. Excellent. In a recent tweet, you mentioned something called the slow oscillation switch model, or SOS model, which proposes sleep is a competitive arena where cognitive processes vie for limited resources. Sounds really exciting, but can you unpack that for us? Help us understand it in English.
Yeah. So one of the most important parts of sleep is something called a slow wave. And that is this very large wave that goes from the front of the brain all the way to the back of the brain. And the whole brain goes from super excitatory to basically completely silent. All the neurons start to communicate, and then they all go silent. And it's quite amazing to see it in the brain.
Like an fMRI or something.
During recordings, you don't see it with fMRI, but you see it when there's recordings with electrodes deep inside the brain. But the idea is that all of these very restorative aspects of sleep occur during this slow wave. This break, and this is actually where the downstate got its name, is this silent period is called the downstate in science. And what we know is that many different processes rely on this slow wave. In science, we call it slow oscillation, but it's also just a slow wave. And one of the things that my lab has discovered is that not only is this important for long-term memory, which is this idea of, remembering all of your past experiences, from very recently to a long time ago, but it also helps with your executive function, which is this idea of working memory, selective attention, inhibiting things that you don't want to pay attention to. And the question is, how does a slow wave do both of these two things within the same sleep phase, right? Because during sleep, you only have a certain amount of slow waves. And so how does the brain figure out how to give attention to your executive function and how to give attention to your long-term memory? And what we've discovered is that the slow wave, the slow oscillation switch model means that during sleep, different cognitive processes vie for the slow wave's attention. And sometimes the slow wave is setting up to help you with the executive function. And then it switches over to be in a long-term memory state, and it starts to work on the long-term memory. And you can actually bias the brain to do more long-term memory processing or more working memory processing. And you can show the next morning, oh, this person, in the experiments I do, I give people a pharmacological intervention. I give them a pill that's Zolpidem, but it's really just Ambien that many people take actually. But that increases your long-term memory brain and it decreases your working memory brain. And it really shows that there's this competition between all these different processes that are vying for your slow waves attention. And so the most important thing you can do to keep all these systems working at their peak is to have as many slow waves as possible, because then there's enough to go around.
And we do that by, like, what does that mean to me outside of your lab?
Yeah. Slow waves happen at the first part of the night. So the reason why we have slow waves happen at the first part of the night is because it's the most restorative. So you've had a full day of waking, that's of being and doing and, arguing and fighting with the world. And it takes a lot of wear and tear on the system. And so the first thing you need when you go to sleep is the slow wave. So what's interesting is that even though we go through cycles of sleep where we have all the different sleep stages, the first part of the night is mostly devoted to your slow waves. And then once you satisfy your need for slow waves, then you get REM sleep that kind of pushes into the morning, and you get a lot of REM sleep in the morning. The problem is that the REM sleep comes on no matter what, because it's driven by circadian rhythm. So it's just an internal clock that says, okay, it's REM time. So the later and later you get, the earlier you get to bed, the greater chances you have of getting the most amount of slow waves. If you start pushing your bedtime to later and later, unfortunately, you get into your REM sleep time. And then the amount of opportunity that you have to get into slow waves decreases.
That is fascinating. We need to lead with that one. Like, that's huge. I was thinking our son's in med school, and he laughs about how many of his classmates will study until 2 a.m. or something, and then they wonder why they struggle on remembering something for an exam. He's pretty good. He and his wife both are great about 9:30. They are asleep. And he seems to—
That's incredible.
Yeah, he seems to remember things well. And I bet it's part of that. I mean, what you're describing.
100% guaranteed to be part of that. Yeah. I mean, this is truly where the most important restorative work is done. REM sleep is also very important, and it's very good for your perceptual process, creativity, emotional regulation. A lot of good things happen in REM sleep, but those restorative things that we're talking about in the downstate, they have been, nature has created this space to naturally have it occur. And, for the most part, animals don't try to fight it, right? Most other animals just say, like, it's bedtime, man, I'm going to sleep. But we are the one animal that has controlled our electrical, has controlled light, and has controlled work. And now we have this 24-hour society, and we have so much that stresses us out, and we experience so much of this when we should be actually going to bed.
Wow. All right. So let's flip over to stress. Stress gets a bad rap. It seems like everybody wants to minimize stress, but you point out, and we had Kelly McGonigal on talking about this as well, that there's a difference between good stress or eustress and bad stress, which is distress. How do we distinguish between the two besides just logic, like, hey, exercise, that's good? Is it frequency, duration? Like, is too much of a good thing a bad thing? Are there other considerations? Like, how can the average person think about their stress and say, okay, that's a good level, amount, frequency, duration, et cetera. That's more distress because there's too much of it, or it's too frequent.
Yeah, that's a great question. At the personal level, it's probably really hard to figure out because, so I'm glad that you know about eustress and distress. I think that's a really important concept to say. Life is stressful. Yes, for sure. But that is also how we learn. Mm-hmm. It's also how we grow, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to push ourselves. Yeah. An athlete doesn't get faster by sitting on a couch. A student doesn't glean more information by watching Netflix.
Yeah, exactly. When it starts to become distress is when, you get into states of burnout, injury, inability to go into the down state, right? You're so stressed that you can't sleep. You're so stressed that you can't relax. You find yourself unable to emotionally regulate. The things that seem like they may not actually be a big deal start to become a big deal, right? Because all of these systems, your emotional health is 100% connected to your restore response. So that relationship that I often focus on the cognitive, but we really, I can talk a lot about the emotional response as well, because as much as that frontal lobe is taking care of your working memory and attention and all that stuff we're talking about executive function, it's also helping you with regulating self-regulation and your emotions. And if you don't get enough downstate and really enhance, allow that prefrontal cortex to really get stronger and more powerful, it's not going to self-regulate. It's not going to be able to calm you down. It's not going to be able to help you process your emotions and get to the place of understanding negative things that happen to you. Your emotions are your amygdala, the emotion centers, begin to run wild. And that is a really strong, I think, indicator of when you have reached some sort of limit where you're not downstating enough, right? When you found yourself kind of not sticking with your health boundaries and not able to get into a relaxed state, not getting into deep sleep. This is when your stress levels have reached beyond the healthy area and they're getting into distress mode.
So we look for to if it's possible to do a self-diagnosis. You said that's very difficult, but we might look for a 1 to 10 scale emotionally. Normally I'm a 6 and today I'm an 8. That might be a little sense. Or physically, I usually am out running 7-minute pace, and today I felt like I was working too hard and it was only 7:45s or whatever. Is it that type of thing that you would then say, either I need to get to bed earlier, I need more time during my day, I need to take advantage of some of these other pieces?
Yeah, there's this concept of, so in the book, I talk a lot about how you can use your restore system to regulate your next upstate. So as you're saying, is my exercise at its peak? Well, maybe, you can do a lot. You can look at your HRV, your resting HRV while you're in bed that morning. And if your HRV hasn't, or your heart rate even hasn't returned to a good baseline, that means that you probably need more downstate. And if you push yourself one more time, and you're basically sapping the energy that you don't even have, right? And that's it's a real thing for glycogen, ATP, but it's also a good metaphor for your emotional state, your cognitive abilities. You have glycogen in your brain that is the same as the glycogen in your body, and you need to actually give yourself enough time to replenish those levels. Right. And if you are constantly, you think about how some people really, all stress is not equal, right? There's a lot of inequality in terms of how much stress people have in their lives. And the amount of stress that you have requires a level of downstate that is commensurate with that level of stress. And so when you're not, that's why I say you're only as good in your upstate as you're replenishing in your downstate, because there's a balance there. And so when things get into that distress mode, it's probably because we haven't spent enough time really getting into relaxation mode. I have I can just give you an interesting example.
Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
So, that there's a fighter, an MMA fighter named Glover Teixeira, and he just won this world championship. And he was somebody who would push himself as hard as possible all the time, Brazilian guy. And at 36, his life started failing. And as most athletes do, when they work so hard all the time and they don't consider their downstate, they get into burnout and overtraining, and they start getting injured. And he had that happen to him. Something's funny.
You're hitting my heart here. You're making me look in the mirror. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So then he realized like, man, this is when most people retire, but I didn't get my world championship. So he locked into a whole world of restorative work, and he starts using his heart rate to define how much he can exercise that day. He starts using downstate principles of when to exercise. He starts reading, Deepak Chopra and the Power of Now and that kind of stuff as well, which is great for your head. Mm-hmm. But he also really started regulating what he's eating, when he's eating, how he's exercising, when he's exercising. And he spends every day 12 hours in bed. Wow. During fight week, when he won his world champion, he spent 20 hours in bed every day for a week. That level of saying the most important thing for me to do is rest so that I can be as powerful as I need to be in the upstate. That's a revolutionary concept, I think. And that he got that, and that it got him the world championship. And he's just won the, 50 Clean Fights award. And, this guy is the real deal.
And he realized it, you said he discovered it at 36. So he probably fought at 38 or something like that. So he's not at his, in quote, physical peak of maybe 28, 31, somewhere in there for the fighters. He's well beyond that. And yet, because he invested time and energy, and that's really interesting. I'm not anywhere near his atmosphere as an athlete, but when I was training for Ironman, I had one season where I did I'd fill out this little survey each morning, check heart rate, check all these things, and not have a workout planned until I got my results of that. And then based on that would decide, will I go do a 18-mile tempo run or a 100-mile ride or whatever. But if it wasn't good, it might be a day off. So it's interesting. That does definitely resonate. Question for you. I was just jotting this down as you were chatting about that last one. I heard it said decades ago that it's not stress that breaks you down. It's change in stress that breaks you down. Is there anything to that? Does that resonate? Is there anything you can build off of that with us?
Yeah, so that's really, one of the things I've been talking to a lot of people about is the pandemic, right? Is how, because we are habit, we need to form habits, and we're really good when we have our program, we know what we're going to wear, we know what we're going to eat, we know where we should be at what time, that we can then prepare for it, and really our energy will be ready for us when we need it. The change from that, this is why change is so hard, right? Because suddenly you don't have any of those standards and those schedules and those things that you can expect and your body can expect. And that happened at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Where suddenly everything was thrown up and we were at home with our kids, having to work, didn't know, how do we dress? How do we eat? How do we deal with this? How does
the Zoom thing work?
Exactly. But then we got our schedules, right? Then we got used to it and people found their way. And it was like a 2-year period of getting into our own rhythms. And suddenly that started to work. Well, now we're back to change. And it's terrifying for so many people. People are really having a hard time figuring out, like, how do I interact with other people face to face? How do I get dressed every day? I don't want to get out of my sweats, right? Like,
back to commuting.
Commuting. That hits home for me because
you're like, I'm good.
Right. So we have to then have our brain set up a new schedule, and that takes a lot of cognitive load. And emotional load. Until we get those systems set up, we're going to be in an overstressed state.
All right, we've been talking a lot about sleep. You're a big fan of naps, obviously. Your first book, Take a Nap, Change Your Life. Love that. That's awesome. Can you talk us through? Obviously, not everyone has the option of a nap, but for those who might have that as an option in their schedule, can you talk us through why it matters? Should it be an everyday thing? We've had several sleep experts on the show. We've asked them about this whole thing. But from your perspective and your research, what's the role of naps and how do we optimize their utilization?
Yeah. So naps are about 50% of the population are natural nappers. And so I'm speaking to them.
Okay, fair enough.
There's a whole bunch of people out there that don't benefit from naps, and I have deep respect for them and that they should definitely take a break doing something, but napping is not the thing that they should do.
Okay, good preface.
And I have a whole bunch of research to back that up. But for the people who are really natural nappers, there's incredible body of research now that shows that, in my research, you can get a full the magnitude of memory consolidation that you would show from a full night of sleep. I can show that with a 90-minute nap, because in the 90-minute nap in the middle of the day, you go through, it's like a mini night, because as I said, nighttime is filled with first few hours of slow wave sleep, and then the last few hours is REM sleep, right? And so you actually need to get a full night to really get the consolidated benefits of that full amount of slow wave sleep and REM sleep. When you take a nap in the middle of the day, obviously this is a 90-minute nap. That's a long nap. So not a lot of people can take those kind of naps, and not always recommended to do that. But you go through one sleep cycle that actually passes through, you get 20, 15 minutes of slow wave sleep and 20, 15 minutes of REM sleep. And we've shown in many different cognitive domains and emotional domains as well, and creativity, that you can get a full night's benefit in one of these naps.
Okay, so let's start with the 90-minute thing. I didn't even know that was a thing. Like when I don't have a good, like if I wake up at 3 a.m, I just can't fall back to sleep, I'll try to sneak in 30, 45 minutes somewhere if the schedule allows. I don't think I could stay asleep 90 minutes. Is that, in your research, you've obviously used that as a baseline. Can you talk us through, is that what you tend to do?
I'm an hour napper, okay. But the reason why experimentally I've used the 90-minute nap is because this cycle, and it allows you to get all of the 3 stages, stage 2, slow wave sleep and REM. But I've also looked at 60-minute naps, and I've looked at half-hour naps. And that just means that you're getting less REM in the 60-minute nap, you're getting less slow wave sleep in the half-hour nap. And it's just, changing the sleep stages. And there's a lot of benefits to each of these sleep stages. So that 30-minute nap is the one that's rich in stage 2 sleep, which is very good for alertness, very good for pressing the reset button and just clearing the decks. It's not necessarily going to get you into the deep restorative stuff, but you do have, you do get some restorative response. You do get into deep breathing in your sleep naturally. And so there is some benefit to getting into stage 2 sleep, which is why, amazingly, you can take a 20-minute nap and wake up and feel great. It's kind of doesn't make any sense, but because of that major shift from being sympathetically aroused and all revved up to suddenly switching to parasympathetically in a restorative state, that's very, very helpful for the rest of the day.
So many questions. All right. So the first one, why it seems like, at least for me, and I'm curious if your research is showing this is not just a Brad thing. I feel like after a nap, I am a different person, like literally, especially if it was a bad night's sleep. I'm happier. I'm more energetic. I have more ideas. Like, it's not just, okay, I feel a little bit better. It is, I'm a different person after that nap sometimes.
Life.
What?
Yeah. Life.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. You should write a book titled that. Why does it influence things so, how can 40 minutes have such an impact, not just on, okay, now I can concentrate for my work, but on emotions and clarity and happiness and energy and just everything?
Yeah. Well, it's a downstate. You go into, it's a heavy, hardcore downstate. And that, you can do the same kind of stuff by doing the deep breathing. And there are some really great, very deep breathing, very slow, deep breathing meditations that I've done that make me also feel like completely revitalized. And that's amazing. So for people who aren't necessarily able to get into sleep, there are other techniques that you can use. But in general, sleep is this really powerful way to get into a downstate, right? And as I said, it is the largest change in your physiology going from wake to sleep that you experience in any time of the day. In one case, obviously, exercise changes your physiology to the going into the red line zone. But it takes you all the way into the deepest part of the downstate, which is the most restorative. And it gives this whole sort of rising, revving up system a huge break, right? So instead of, especially if you're sleep deprived, you're arriving in the middle, at the beginning of your day already depleted. Right? You didn't get to fill up your tanks. You didn't replenish all your resources. So when you are then asked to do all sorts of things that day and respond to people and self-regulate, and you don't have the resources. So then when you get into that mini downstate in the day, you suddenly fill up your tank. And then you can be that new person that you needed to be.
All right, so I want to take a quick rabbit trail here. Some of your research explores potential interventions with cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's. Such a focus now. It's influencing so many people. Is there any reason for hope on these front for stabilizing or reversing decline coming around the corner in the next few years?
Yeah. So a lot of it has to do with this relationship between increasing your downstates during sleep, but also during the day with what you can do to increase restorative processes during the day and then maximize your sleep at night. So there's new research showing that, and this is not going to make anyone happy, but that the poor sleep that you have in your 40s and your 50s puts you at risk for greater risk for dementia and Alzheimer's in your 60s and 70s and 80s. And the reason why is that one of the things that happens during the slow wave is this flushing out of the toxins that are left in your brain through just use, thinking and doing and activation. You actually have these little proteins that get left in the brain. And every night during the slow wave and during this really big restorative parasympathetic bloom that happens at the same time as your slow waves, this washes all of these toxins out of your brain. So when people spend less time during that time, more by sleep depriving themselves, by not getting into relaxation mode, by being overly stressed, and having more sympathetic arousal, more of those proteins get left. And those are the ones that become the plaques that we associate with dementia and Alzheimer's. So what we can do in our 40s is make sure that we're getting the most amount of parasympathetic response during the day, most restorative response during the day, and also trying to get all of our slow waves in as much as possible. So getting to sleep early is a good way of doing that. Making sure that when, regulating our upstates so that they all kind of happen together during the day, right? Work on your eating, getting good light in the morning. So make sure that your upstates are kind of have the right downbeat, and then make sure that you're eating, say, 50% of your calories before noon. And then really and let things slow down in the evening when your insulin stops being produced, right? Because then you allow your system to really go into this natural downstate, and you give your metabolism the downstate it needs. Think about when you're exercising, right? When are you getting that big burst, that revved up sympathetic response? That should occur as far away from the nighttime as possible so that you have enough time to calm yourself down, calm down your heart rate, and let the restorative response come on so it matches the downstate of your sleep. So there's a lot of things that we can do. We start aging in our 40s, in our 30s even. And so, and the way that we age is we give up our downstates. Right? We sacrifice all these things because we're constantly at service to other people and to our jobs and our goals. But the way to stay healthy for longer is by really focusing on the downstate.
You started that off by saying this isn't going to make people happy. And I understand if you're in your 70s and you're looking back and saying, I didn't sleep well. But for those people in their 30s, 40s, early 50s, it's great news. It's something practical they can do that We'll find out how much impact it has in your 70s and 80s, but it makes your today better too. So it's almost like a double benefit that you're preaching there. Your book provides what you call a recovery plus plan. It's a 4-week period, encompasses everything: sleep, circadian rhythms, nutrition, exercise. Could you give us a 10,000-foot view of some of the key elements that maybe we haven't talked about already here?
Yeah. So the plan is basically giving people a week per domain of action. And the domains are the autonomic nervous system. You just choose, there's like 7 options, and you can choose one that whatever feels the easiest that you can adopt into your life and do on a daily basis. You spend a week just making that a habit. And then you switch to the sleep circadian rhythm, and you just take a week to choose one and make that a habit while you're also running the first one, keeping going. And then you go to the exercise one, and you just choose an option there that's going to fit into your life and work for you while the other 2 are still running. And then you move on to the nutrition, and you work on choosing something from that list. And then by the end of the 4-week, you really have a really strong downstate plan. That means that you are maintaining good relaxation during the day. You're not letting yourself get too inflamed or stressed out. You're really maintaining a good sleep habits, and which is going to increase your downstate restorative activity. Also, exercise. There's so much that we need to do to make sure that we are getting regular exercise. And people who are, really good at exercising and already have that, as a pro team, pro levels, there's a lot we can do to avoid burnout. And there's a lot we can do to avoid overtraining and stress by integrating HRV and integrating, as you said, heart rate into this idea of saying, give yourself more rest. And it's sort of, people who are really into athletics might find that that's an anathema of like, no, I want to work harder, right? But actually more rest is really the gift that I give these people. And then in nutrition, definitely setting up habits, finding what you should be eating, but also when you should be eating. And once you get that rolling, then you could even start adding more on, as you kind of get just the initial setup.
This is so important. This is so valuable. Are you getting pushback? Your book's been out for a little while now. Are you getting pushback in any ways of people saying that's not practical, or that doesn't work, or you're crazy, or like what? Surely not everyone is as big a believer as I am in what you're doing here. Where are you getting the pushback?
To be honest, I haven't had any pushback, because I actually think that everyone needs this so badly right now.
It makes sense.
That we are in a state of over stress and panic and bad news everywhere. And I think, and just the message that we need to focus on ourselves, and put the importance of our health and our well-being at the forefront of our day, and think of ourselves as, because I think a lot of the time what I keep hearing is, this is what I've been thinking my whole life, but I've never had a framework to understand it in. And now all these pieces fit into this framework. And now I can kind of move on and sort of see how these pieces all fit together. So that's been more my experience, is that people are kind of happy to have the overview and the big picture.
Well, and maybe one of the big pieces is even your quote about you'll only be as good in your upstate as you are in your downstate. It almost gives you the permission, because I think a lot of us grew up or have lived in a world where I could use some downstate, but I need to work. I feel guilty. I would be letting people down. And it's almost like you're giving us permission, not permission. You're saying, if you'll do A, B will be better. And you're saying you want to do better at B. So let's integrate some A.
Yeah, I think in general, the pushing yourself hard is a false economy. It creates this, you think you're doing something, but you're just spinning your wheels and you're draining your energy, and you're not working at the level that you think you're working at.
Yeah, this is beautiful. I want to be conscious of your time. We really appreciate it. Is there anything that I have not teed up with a question that you want to make sure gets out here to our listeners before we close the door on this one?
Gosh, no, I mean, one of the things I am excited to do is just talk to people. So the more I can get the word out and, go talk at companies and go talk at, book clubs, if they, I can zoom in on book clubs and, meet people and give that as a offering. I think that the message is we need it right now. So as much as I can get the word out, I'm happy to. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you so much. Don't you just love when someone like Dr. Mednick comes along and lays out what really works in practical terms we can all integrate into our lives, and it's evidence-based? Outstanding. Thanks for tuning into the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. We are truly grateful for each one of you who choose to invest just a little of your time each week with us. It really means a lot. Love the notes we get. So thank you so much. If we can ever be of service in helping you enhance your organization's employee wellness strategy or talk through questions you have about pursuing a career in coaching, please reach out to us anytime. Email is results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or you can access us through the website, catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Next week's episode focuses on the gut microbiome with Dr. Chris Lowry and why the number of total servings of fruits and vegetables might not be exactly what you thought was in terms of importance. Now, it's time to be a catalyst. This is Dr. Brad Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute. I'll speak with you soon on another episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast, or maybe over at the YouTube coaching channel.